everyone. Item number 1 is attendance. I believe everyone's here in terms of Cabinet members. So item 2 is easy, so there's no apologies for absence. So we can move straight to item 3, it's declarations of interest. Derek?
Thank you, Leader. With regard to agenda item number 9 regarding the age range of Ysgol Gwyn Lliw, my advice to members is that you have a personal interest if you are a council-appointed governor of the school. You also have an interest if you are a governor not council-appointed or have a close personal associate who attends or works at the school, and that interest would be a prejudicial one. Now, my understanding is that Councillor Fiona Cross has children who attend Ysgol Gwyn Lliw and therefore will be leaving during that item.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you, Councillor Cross. And with regard to agenda item number 7, which relates to the proposed future use of former Victoria Primary School, you will have an interest if you have any connection with Torfaen Arts Resource Centre or the My Support Team programme. I'm not aware of any interests which fall within this category. Thank you, Leader.
Right, we're all happy with that. Thank you, Dennis. So we'll move on to the confirmation of the Cabinet minutes from the 22nd of January. Let's open those up on the screen. Okay, go through those minutes. Everyone happy to approve those as a true and accurate record? Right. Okay. Item 5 then, update on actions. Any updates to report on, Chief Exec?
No, there's no outstanding actions, thank you.
Okay, so item 6 then is the financial forecast, budget and medium-term financial planning report. I'll move our hand over in the first instance to Nigel Radius.
Thank you, Leader. This report does 3 things. Takes you through the latest update position in respect of 2018-19, the finalists of the budget, and then the medium-term financial plan for the 4 years following 1920. So in terms of the first part of the report, in section 4, you'll see the table there, and then some commentary around the pressure areas, and they are consistent with the pressures that I've reported all the way through the year. Social care and housing, it's in children's services, and within the rest of the budget, it's mainly in 3 areas: Torfaen training, catering and cleaning, and then some corporate mitigations that were agreed this time last year that haven't been followed through. So there's not a lot of there's not a lot of movement on those. So that is going to give us a challenging year-end position. It's going to impact on our balances. No good. It's going to impact on our balances, and at the end of the year, I'm going to have to do some things to try and boost those balances as we close down the accounts. And as I make the point at the end, we really can't have a repeat in 1920 of the situation we've got in 1819. You get these years; they come along, and spikes happen, and then you have to move past them and make sure you don't have a repeat. And if you think about the budget, the construct, 3 of those areas we have, well, all of those areas we have addressed. We put the children's services demand up to the level we're experiencing, so we've got to hold it there or hopefully reduce it. And we've addressed Torfaen training, and we've addressed catering and cleaning, and we don't have any of the corporate one-liners in the following budget, so it should be better. There's a table on the mitigations just showing how the mitigations were approved and how we tracked it through. And whilst we have some that we haven't achieved, overall we've achieved the vast majority of the mitigations that we set this time last year. There's a section then in section 6 on use of reserves. And members can see that in addition to the pressure that we've got on the year end that I have to fund from reserves, we've got quite a lot of spend actually out of our reserves during the year. Do you need me to wait, Leader? In terms of then the budget for 2019-20, I mean, this is Cabinet's last consideration in relation to the budget. So in 7.2, I take members through one of the key final determinations, which is around council tax. The steer I've been given is at 5.95% for the Torfaen element, so that's going to give a bandy of 1315.49, an increase of nearly £74 for the year. I do refer to the recent Cardiff University report, which does start to show how council tax is going to keep taking the strain if public funding isn't increased from other sources. And I know that had a lot of media coverage, when it came out. I put it in there because council tax and how it's used is not a Torfaen unique thing. All councils in Wales have to face that. Then in 7.3, I've got a section on the cross-cutting resources, an overview scrutiny and the recommendations back from them. There was 3 recommendations. We had them verbally at the last meeting. The first one was in relation to the farm, and members can see what the recommendation was there. And in terms of the response, you've indicated you accept that, and indeed the Task and Finish group is up and running and working with a view to reporting at the end of March, so that Cabinet of the 9th of April can consider that. There's a recommendation in relation to Blamham and Workingmen's Hall, and I've carefully worded the response there that it's subject to the views of the Blamham Workingmen's Hall Committee.
And he's responded, I confirm that the Board of the Workmen's Hall accept the cuts to the funds allocated to the hall by Torfaen County Borough Council as outlined in the budget report of the Council for the next 4 years. Okay, so that's...
And I think that's fine. I think that answer within the Cabinet report allows that to happen, but without it becoming an issue at Council in terms of various different views. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's a matter for the working men's hall. And then there was a recommendation about the Older Persons Forum's money, and that recommendation isn't there anymore. I've put the comments then that were made by the Overview and Scrutiny Committee in full, and just a comment at the bottom that they're all going to be followed up, and those comments will follow through into Council, just so that the Overview and Scrutiny realise that we're reporting everything back. In 7.4, I make the point that, consistent with the vast majority of councils, we're assuming that the extra cost burden arising from the teachers' pension cost increase is going to be funded by the UK government. It's unaffordable in any other way. In 7.5, there's a recommendation. There was one of the mitigations that wasn't achievable that we've now taken out of the budget. 7.6, I make the same point about the fire levy as I made about the teachers' pensions. I think unhelpfully the Fire Authority has levied at the higher rate. But if the UK government fund it like we want them to, then they will lower the rate. The Fire Authority went against the Treasurer's recommendation, which, it's late in the day. I don't suggest we make further cuts for something that may or may not happen. We'll underwrite it from reserves this year. And I think we should keep pushing that this is a UK government decision that is unaffordable at a local level. And anything that moves away from that I don't think is helpful. I make the point that we'll bring a report back on fees and charges. I make the point that we're in the process of reviewing discretionary rate relief, so we should give notice on that. And then in 7.10 you've got what the budget is going to look like per services, to the balanced figure. So that's largely it in terms of the budget. Then there are some sections on the capital strategy that went to the audit committee. I mean, in essence, what that is saying is, we've got a bit more money, and you should give yourself some time to think that, so you get a proper member-led capital strategy, because you can take a little bit of time over that to get something that fits with your priorities, and perhaps goes beyond just having it dominated by 21st century schools, because you've got that opportunity now. Then in terms of the medium-term financial forecast for the following 4 years, members will recall the last one had a financial challenge of 25 million. This one now has a financial challenge of 19.5 million. There's a range of things that have impacted on that, but the principal one is moving from an assumption that Welsh Government won't go back from at least a cash flat line. So rather than it being built on cash negative of -1, it's built on a cash flat line. There are some other assumptions in there that are laid out within the report, but 19.5 million, and it's largely as is, as the forecast always is, the only exception being that we built in your policy direction intent around domiciliary care. And then in 9.6, I start talking about how we may start to think about bridging that. I make the important point that T22 is not going to be the answer to the whole financial challenge. It can't be. Cabinet are aware of the areas being looked at. So we've still got to look at efficiency reductions. We've still got to look at fundamentally challenging where we spend all our money. And we've perhaps got the potential for seeing where we could use some capital investment to reduce revenue cost, which we haven't been able to think about in the past. So that's the main guts of the report. In terms of the conclusions, I make the point that I made right at the start about 18-19, and that I'll have to do some stuff as I close down the accounts to try and help us. I make the point that the budget has been challenging, and a bit about capital and the MTFP, and that's it, Lena.
Okay, any questions to Nigel before we proceed? In terms of my contribution to this, I want to start by thanking members and officers for their hard work over the past year. We've worked really hard this year to try and keep services going in the face of austerity. I think that's sometimes something that's taken for granted a little bit, but the work of members both on Cabinet and in scrutiny committees this year has been really tough work, but we've rolled up our sleeves and we've done our best. In scrutiny, I think the section that deals with the scrutiny report, section 7, shows that we've taken the points that scrutiny made seriously at 7.3. We've taken each of their recommendations seriously, taken them forwards. And the Older People's Forums, for example, we've taken that saving out in recognition of the points that the members made in scrutiny. I think that process is a testament to Lynn Williams and the officers that work on that process. I think it gets more effective each year at both doing effective scrutiny rather than anything after the fact or anything that sort of concentrates on grandstanding. It actually gets underneath the real sort of hub of the budget, of the mitigations, and tries to get a greater understanding of all members, and is a chance for us to challenge officers and to push back. I say that because I know it's not easy, but this budget really is us doing the best of a bad job, as our funding is again cut in real terms. For the 9th year running now, we're having to make large cash savings as local governments once again left to pick up the pieces of national decisions. And I say that because there's few easy choices remaining, and I think that's something we've had to face up to as an administration. No one wants to be cutting services or raising council tax, but this is the reality faced by councils across the UK, and that's councils of all political persuasions, not just here in Torfaen and not just Labour councils. Councils of all persuasions are having to wrestle with the difficult situation of relying more and more on council tax as the money from central government gets taken away. We've seen that across the country. We've also seen that across Wales. I would point out that our council tax rise, although we'd like it to have been lower, is in line with other councils or lower than some across Gwent and across Wales. So that's just sort of points to the reality that councils are facing. I think sometimes people like to sort of argue from a point of view of not actually having to take the decisions themselves, of having their cake and eating it. And that's something that we can't do in this position. We have to make a budget balance. I would also say that I'm proud that we've kept our priorities intact as part of this budget. Not only are we keeping vital services running, but we've prioritised schools, giving them extra cash. Not going to be easy for schools in the coming year because they've got lots of pressures to meet, but we've shown that they're a clear priority. by giving them extra cash. We've tried to protect services that matter most to the most vulnerable people in our society, in our communities, services like social care, housing, things that really do have an impact on some of the most vulnerable people. They might not be the people who can shout the loudest, but they're the people often who would have their lives devastated if we were to make deeper cuts in the services they rely on. We've also tried to be true to our cleaner and greener priority in the corporate plan by maintaining spending on things that litter and things like that try and bring up the fabric of our communities. That's not easy. I think national politicians need to get real to the fact that if we are to prioritise, something has to fall off the edge. Otherwise it's not prioritising at all if you try and pretend you can prioritise everything in a situation of falling resources. So I would like to challenge any of our political opponents who do want to freeze council tax about where another £2.5 million of cuts will come from. They can't just come out of thin air, and they have to come from somewhere. And our judgment as an administration is that if we were to have to make another £2.5 million of extra cuts, that would have a devastating impact on local services. It would result in services closing. It would result in some of the things that the most vulnerable people in our communities rely on really falling foul of greater cuts. So that's the balance that we have to strike every year. It's not an easy balance, but it has to come somewhere, and we feel that's the balance that we've struck this year. I would say, though, that if we just had a real terms flat settlement each year, we would be able to keep council tax much lower and protect services. Because of the gearing effect, every 1% of money we lose in real terms from the Welsh Government, we have to put council tax up by 4% to plug the gap. So if our money just went up in line with inflation, so a real terms flat increase in our money, we would be able to look to keep council tax much lower, and we would be able to protect some of the services and invest in the services that people really rely on. I think one of the lessons from England, where services like social care often have been decimated, either sold off to the highest bidder in the private sector or cut to smithereens, is the impact both on people, because we're dealing with human beings here, not just statistics, and in terms of other public services where the NHS has borne the brunt, shows that's a real false economy and not where we want to head in Wales. I think for me as well, it would be remiss of me not to make the point that austerity really is showing that council tax just isn't fit for purpose in the 21st century, especially in less affluent areas like ours, where the council tax base is lower, and therefore the money that you bring in for each percentage of council tax is diminished. It's always very easy to say that something is imperfect and much harder to construct what goes in its place, but I really think we need to say loud and clear that the situation councils across the UK face shows that council tax just isn't fit for purpose in the 21st century. There is a brighter bit of news in this report in terms of the capital programme, and I look forward to having a discussion about where we prioritise in that programme going forwards. I'm proud as a council that we have prioritised our school estate in recent years, but it has come at the cost of everything else in terms of our capital programme. Hopefully now we can continue to invest in that school's estate, to continue to bring schools up to standard for the 21st century, but also invest in some of the areas that have suffered as a result of a lack of capital investment in the past. And I look forward to debating ideas with members there. Section 9 on the medium-term financial forecast should also come as a sobering sort of challenge to us as members, because there's no light at the end of the tunnel yet. When Theresa May stood up and said that austerity was over, I cheered for a second and then maybe thought that she may not entirely be transmitting the full picture, because austerity certainly seems to remain for local government and for public services, and a big challenge remains. We talked about the £19 million figure there. I think T22 is key. You're right, I think, in that it won't solve every challenge, but I think it's a challenge to us, I think, to be as innovative and how we challenge how we do things as a council, if we're to meet that challenge going forwards. However we respond, though, I think it's clear that after a decade of austerity, local services really are at breaking points. We continue to strain for savings, strain to be as efficient as we can be, but sooner or later things reach breaking point. We've seen in some councils across the border in England already that they've said that the breaking point for them is not being able to set a budget. I would hate that we in Wales get to that point. We really need to aim higher than that. So I do commend this budget to Cabinet, and I will commend it to Council on the 5th of March, not because I believe that it's perfect, but I believe that it is the best job that we could do as an administration in a very difficult situation. I'd again appeal to the national political situation that if we want local public services as we know them and as we value them to remain, then austerity really does need to come to an end. And I'll end on one point. The column that I wrote in the South Wales Argus last week pointed to some of the people who I believe are real heroes in our local communities, the people who work to provide local public services, from social care workers to the staff and teachers in our schools, to the people working to keep people from being homeless, to the people helping, who I spoke about on television at the weekend, to help people cope with the changes that come in their lives through being switched on to universal credit. The people who work for this council aren't faceless bureaucrats. They really are local heroes. And I believe that it's incumbent on us to set a budget that enables them to get on with the good work that they do in our communities. I believe that budget does that in very difficult circumstances, and that's why I commend it to you and why I move the recommendations that are on page 25. Any other contributions, Dave?
I just think I'd quite like to ask whether Nigel, you've had any constructive and viable alternatives to this budget from any of the opposition groups.
I've had no engagement from any officers, any members other than Cabinet and the Overview and Scrutiny Committee.
So anything you receive subsequent to this meeting will be completely new to you, and you won't have had any chance to work through and plan and factor in.
That would be true.
Just to finish on a high, I just wanted to echo what Anthony was saying. I mean, it's a really difficult conversation to have around council tax, but this is what it goes to funding, and these are the people that we're enabling to basically hold our communities together. None of us got in it to make cuts and raise council tax. But having been on the council for 7 years now, I feel like I've seen quite a lot of the services that we provide, and I've got to say I am, in the face of austerity, I'm very impressed with what we do, because not all of those services will be visible to everybody out there in the community, and that is until you need them. But when you need them, by God, they're there for you, and I think that needs to be championed to the rafters, really, because this is what our council tax goes towards funding. It affects all of us, I've got to say. I have conversations with my family. It's a conversation on a Sunday, if on a frequent basis. This affects all of us. But as I explain to them, and they understand, this goes towards paying for social care workers, our teachers, the people who keep the streets clean. It goes towards so much, and this is the benefit of having a good council. So it's not an easy conversation to have. And the reason I've raised the question around alternatives is because if there were credible alternatives, we would be doing them, and there aren't. We're doing the best of a bad job. Whilst austerity is in place, this is what we can do. This is what Labour values looks like. That's protecting the most vulnerable, and sometimes that's a difficult thing.
I'm glad you say that, because 90% of people are in the fortunate position of not having to use many services like social care. But the 10% who do use them really rely on them for their quality of life. And look, there are always choices around any budget situation. But what I find difficult is when people present false choices. Now, it is a valid choice to say that we should freeze council tax, but there would have to be £2.5 million of extra cuts. And my view is that would have massive consequences for the most vulnerable people in our communities. And actually, when you have an honest conversation with people, I get it all the time when I go for a drink, go to try and watch the football or the rugby in the pub, people come up to me and have that debate. Actually, most of them, when you say, look, I don't want to raise council tax, I don't enjoy having difficult conversations and having, risking being unpopular. But I do it in full consciousness that were we not to do that, I believe that it would cause real suffering. And actually, when you say that to people, when you explain to them, as I tried to in that column, that it isn't just about the bins being collected, important though that is, it's about so much more than that. It's about the fabric of our communities and about protecting the most vulnerable. Actually, they are open to that conversation about paying a bit more. What is very frustrating to people, I think, is the paradigm that we're in at the moment, that councils across the UK are in, when because of the choices of the government, the UK government ultimately, because they're the ones who control the purse strings, when because of their choices we're having to cut services at the same time as putting council tax up. That's very difficult for them to understand. I understand it completely. It was difficult for me to understand before I was in this job. And people have got busy lives, and fortunately for them, local government finance probably doesn't take up a lot of their thinking. But it doesn't make the choice any less real for us, and that is the real choice that we face. And as you say, what perhaps we rightly object to is when people say that, present a false choice to people, like they can have the cake and eat it, because unfortunately we can't. I'd love to live in that world. I'd love to have a sort of a unicorn in every field and chocolate running down every river, but it's not the situation we're in, and we have to deal with the reality of the situation. If we did not deal with the reality of this situation, it would be an abdication of our responsibilities. If we were to go out there and say to people what would be a lie, i.e. that we can freeze council tax and everything would carry on just as it is now, then I believe that would be a gross abdication of responsibility, and I'm not prepared to do that. So thank you for the points you make. Fiona?
I totally agree with both your points there, and I'm coming from a perspective as well where I've been elected for 10 years, so all I've done essentially is make cuts. They're not easy decisions, but these are wise decisions, and I really want to commend the efforts that were made within the scrutiny, because there was robust debate, there were great suggestions, they have been captured, they are being fed back and being taken seriously. So members have had an opportunity to come back with genuine altered budgets, ideas, or things that they find completely unpalatable. I think that's really important.
I've got to echo everything that has been said in the process. Whilst to some degree safeguarding my portfolio area of adult social care and Mandy's of children's social care, it has been we're all in this together. Social care has had to make decisions. It will impact on people, but we've taken a pragmatic approach where we as a council have nailed our colours to the mast of what we are prepared to save and secure, and vulnerable people are that. In David's world, homelessness, my world, adult social care and people coming out of hospital, trying to prevent people going into hospital. Mandy's world, looked after children. We have the resources there while still taking part of the burden of the situation where we are. You only have to look to England. You only have to go on a conference where my equivalents of England are, and they tell you the dire, and that's not an exaggeration, the dire situation that health and social care is in. I don't want that for the people of Torfaen. And as everybody around the table has said, we didn't come into politics to make cuts, reduce funding. The shift in the type of individuals that social care look after. We used to look after people with medium concerns. It's high-risk concern now, and that's where the budget has driven us. But the reality is we're failing the people if we just bury our head in the sand and say no council tax rise. Look at other authorities that either prior to an election or subsequent to election have done 0% rises. They've made false economies, and they are the people setting a higher rate council tax than we are now. It's a false economy. We're being false to the public if we don't turn around and say, this is why we've done this. We've engaged as a membership through scrutiny. I echo Fiona's point. I think it's a very good process. We would be burying our heads in the sand, and we'd be doing a great disservice for the public of Torfaen if we didn't propose a sensible budget. And I believe this is a sensible budget.
Well, I find it increasingly difficult to say anything that hasn't already been said. So at the risk of repeating other views, then I'll keep it short. A couple of points that I'd like to make. First of all, I think it's entirely unfair that Anthony, as the leader, shoulders virtually all of the kickbacks on this and virtually all the criticisms. Further from the truth you couldn't get, because if ever there was a true reflection of collective responsibility, then it is through the process of the budget constructions, because it is a collaboration of all of the cabinet members, contributions from all of the cabinet members. There's another view also that perhaps cabinet members, the politicians, are being fed, if not wrong information, then fed information that is happiest sitting with officers. In short, officers are perhaps in control of the situation. Further from the truth, that couldn't be either. I'm sure that Nigel has on many occasions been frustrated by the interventions of cabinet members and other councillors, and I'm sure that in his headspace very often he suggests to himself that we should go away. But the truth of it is that can't happen because of the system we operate. And all cabinet members, and I for one am happy to say that I'm pretty pleased with and proud to serve with the cabinet members that sat around this table, because every one of them in their own way has assiduously, robustly challenged through the whole process, and the role of officers has been there to support what we've come up with in large measure. And I often think this old saying that an old geezer like me that comes out with from time to time, that we live in a world of is, not in a world of ought. And it seems to me that those who criticise and throw rocks after the event, and are even now, after the whole process has been gone through and done and dusted, and in spite of the fact that we've gone through this wonderful, this massively important cross-cutting scrutiny, people now at the 11th hour are still suggesting that there are ways and means of doing it this way and that way. It's the easiest thing in the world, because they are making criticisms from the comfortable position of a world of ought. We have to take difficult decisions from the uncomfortable position of a world of is. And in that sense, I'm very, very comfortable with the decisions that we've made that have resulted in the budget, and I commend it. And I'm sure that Anthony's absolutely right. He will be commending this to the next council meeting, and we'll have to wait to see what those gainsayers will come up with at the time, because, I repeat, it's the easiest thing in the world to attack from the outside when they have absolutely no responsibility for taking those decisions. Responsibility is something entirely different.
Yeah, I just want to echo what everybody else has said as well. I mean, I don't think any of us come on to become a councillor or a politician to make council tax increases or to cut any services which are going to have an impact on the vulnerable people of Torfaen. A lot of work's gone in, challenging decisions, but I just commend the decision made. It's, like I said, it's a difficult one. Austerity is very difficult, but we've got to put the priority of the people of Torfaen first.
Thank you. Really, I've just got to commend my colleagues here and the comments that they've made. When you look at where Torfaen stands now and where it stood, say, 30 years ago when we were losing jobs in the steel industry, this valley suffered tremendously. And it had to come to terms with that. And I think that's why we're in the position we're in now. When you look across the border and look at what's happened in Swindon, and the outcome that that's going to have for their citizens there. I think we've faced that already. We've still got more to come, but we are able to do it in a very truthful and honest way, and we can hold our heads up in pride because of that, I think. So thank you again, Anthony, for your leadership.
I'd like to exactly the same and echo what everybody said. Thanks for the leadership. Thanks to Nigel and his teams and the officers for bringing us to where we are. It's a very difficult situation, but I commend the budget. Let's go for it.
Thanks all, because that is welcome to show that this is a collective process that we've gone into. In response to Alan's point, I'd like to think that this job isn't easy. It's a job that often looks easier from the outside than it does from the inside. And I reflect back on my thoughts maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and I probably thought it was easier looking from the outside than I do now across the other side of the desk. So that's appreciated. Also, the leadership of Nigel, I think, is worth pointing out, and of the other officers from Alison and others in this organisation. It's not been easy for them either. As people who take their responsibilities as chief officers in public services very seriously, I know, and don't do things lightly. I think, in a way, it's getting that balance right, isn't it? I think we work as a team, but we also challenge each other. I don't think for a second that if we had a relationship of us shouting and screaming at officers, that would achieve a solitary job. In fact, it would destroy the working relationship that we've built up, because you quite rightly say that that's an unreasonable way to work. That's not how things should work in the year 2019, in my book, and certainly it's not the way that it will work under my leadership. But that challenge is there. I think Veronica provides useful historical and geographical context in what she says. Austerity is made worse in areas that have less affluence to fall back on themselves. A lot of the services we provide we could pull out of if we were in a more affluent area where, you know, private funding could step into the breach. We don't want that to happen, but we don't have the option here because there's not the private wealth that there is in other areas. And I think the geographical context is useful too. I look across the border when I speak to local government colleagues in England, and the situation they're facing where they really are holding services together with sort of sticky tape and blue tack at times, or other situations with colleagues in maybe Conservative administrations and councils where they just meet a few times a year to dole out contracts to the private sector. I don't want to get there, and I've said many times, especially in the context of speaking to Welsh Government, that I think we need to aim higher than just being a little bit better than that in Wales, and I hope we do. But I think the geographical and historical context you provide is quite right. Mandy's quite right. No one does this lightly. A lot of work has gone into it, but I think we are in a situation where necessity has to take control. As David said, it's the easiest thing in the world. There's a saying in America that the easiest job in the world is being a Monday morning quarterback, because you can say every pass that you would have thrown to within an inch of where it should have gone. The much harder job is actually being on the field making the passes yourself. For once, that's not a football or rugby analogy, so I won't get looked at by the chief executive, even though it's still sport. But it just shows that actually being in the hot seat, having to make the decisions, is difficult. I think David makes a number of good points about the challenge that we've given as part of this budget process. And in a way, I think it's a shame in some respects that a lot of that is behind the scenes. It has to be, but maybe that's an issue with the cabinet system. Is throughout this process we have led it politically more than I think's ever happened in this council before. We've both set the terms in terms of our priorities under Corporate Plan 3 about the vulnerable, about education, about cleaning and greening. We've set clear parameters, for example, saying to officers, don't come to us with, you know, wild and wacky suggestions about outsourcing, because that's not where we want to be as a council. And we have knocked back and challenged suggestions in that spirit of cooperation. Again, it's a balance, isn't it? Because you don't want to sort of make public the first sort of round for fear of scaring people who, you know, work in the services or rely on the services that we've decided to protect as part of the process. But that doesn't mean that's any less of a job that's been done. I think the points that Richard and Mandy make, and that Dave Daniels makes as well from a social care work, are pertinent, because I think social care is the crux of any council budget. If you try and take too much money from social care, then lots of residents probably won't notice the difference, but the most vulnerable residents will notice a huge difference. and that's not something we want to do. But if you don't scrutinise social care enough in terms of savings, the rest of the council and all the services that the rest of the council provides suffer as a result. So I think the crux of budgets in many respects in councils is getting that balance right. As a finance spokesperson for the WLJ, I'm in the privileged position, although privilege is an interesting word given the situation, of looking at lots of other councils and helping them and talking to them about what they're doing as well. And yes, we can learn from other councils, but I think we can hold our heads up with the job that we've done here. And just to end on reflecting the point that Fiona made about a thank you to councillors, that is genuine, because councillors of all parties have tried to engage in this process when it would have been much easier just to stick their heads in the sand, but they did engage with the scrutiny process, just as we've engaged as a cabinet and tried to make the best of a very bad situation. And I know that's not what most of us sort of dreamt in our hearts when we got elected of doing, but I think it's a very necessary job for the people that we serve. So I'd like to thank all the councillors across the council for the work they've done and the way in which they've engaged with the budget so far. With that then, if people are happy to move to the recommendations, at the bottom of page 25 it's recommended that Cabinet firstly notes the latest 2018-19 forecast position and the proposed funding approach. Secondly, that we agree the final budget proposals outlined in paragraph 7 for recommendation to Council on the 5th of March. Thirdly, that we note the proposed capital programme. And fourthly, that we note the medium-term financial forecast. Are we all happy to approve those recommendations? Thank you, colleagues, and thank you, Nigel. Okay, then, we're moving on to agenda item 7 then, on the proposed future use of Victoria Primary School. I'll hand over to Veronica in the first instance, and then to Victor.
Thank you. The school in Abersucken Ward had been at the centre of the community for many years, and local members were keen for the building to be retained for ongoing use by the community. Today's report before us is a proposal for shared usage by the new Torvine Arts Resource Centre to be based in the school and the Children's Services Regional Collaboration Programme My Support Team, also known as MIST, providing a viable way forward. Most maintenance responsibility will be retained by the Council, reducing the obligations of the new Arts Community Interest Company considerably. I'm delighted that a new home has been found for the Multi-Intervention Support Team, MIST as well, which has successfully worked out of rented premises at Mam Islet for the last 14 years. Funding has been pooled from Children's Services, Education and the local Health Board and Aaron Bevan University Health Board. Torvine has also worked in partnership with Monmouthshire Council and a third sector organisation delivered the programme. This service has been highly effective in reducing the cost of childcare placements and is now being expanded to include the other Greater Gwent authorities. New premises are required for the expanded programme to be delivered by Torvine in the Pontypool area, and a capital grant has been allocated from the Integrated Care Fund, managed by the Health Board for Welsh Government. This can be used for building purchase, or in this case, refurbishment of just over £500,000. The school's been identified as a suitably located property for the expanded childcare programme, which will now be known as My Support Team, the other MIST. The building can be refurbished to fulfil the needs of MIST, providing safe internal and external areas, and also accommodate Torvine Arts Resource Centre, whilst ensuring that the two are segregated for safeguarding reasons. Details are contained in the report. I commend this report to you. This is an absolutely excellent example of partnership working across Gwent, ensuring at the same time the future of a much-needed child-centred service, as well as providing a community facility and a positive use and sustainable future for a building at the heart of a local Torvine village. Mr Vandula will be able to explain in more detail and respond to any questions you have. Thank you.
Good morning, members. Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Crick. I think the gist of the proposal has been well summarised by Councillor Crick. Perhaps what I would highlight is that there's been quite a lot of collaboration in getting us to where we are between officers across various services within the council, but also with colleagues in other authorities, especially the ones that are involved with MIST, and quite good dialogue between officers and the community group. It's always good to support a community group, but this would have been a great challenge to give the entire site to this community group, given the condition of the property, but also their lack of resources, being quite a newly formed organisation. But I think this solution mitigates that risk on the community organisation, but also puts us in a place where the building will be well utilised, put in a good condition to start with. So when this community group moves in, for the part that they'll be responsible for, their exposure to outgoings will not be as extensive as it would have been otherwise. And it also means that the risk of us ending up receiving back a property which is in worse condition than it was before is hugely reduced. So, as Councillor Crick says, I think this is a proposal that I would happily recommend to the Council for acceptance. Thank you.
Thank you both. Any questions for Veronica or Victor? Mandy?
It's not a question, it's just a comment. So I welcome this positive move. I think MIST has been very successful in the last 14 years. So successful that it sort of works with challenging children placed in foster care. And I think resulting in being expanded into this building, bringing the other 4 LAs in, is just a welcome move. Yeah, and also it will provide extra opportunities for families to have drop-in appointment sessions at the centre instead of having long waits. So yeah, I really commend it.
I'd like to add my voice to that. Certainly it's good to hear about an expanding collaboration with neighbouring local authorities. It's good to see a valuable public service located in the north of the borough. And it's also, good to give the community group an opportunity to utilise the building for their purposes as well for the community. I think this strikes the balance between giving them that opportunity and not sort of giving them a maintenance liability that they would struggle with at the outset. That the MIST service can bring sort of money in to help do the building up, and I think that's a good thing to do. I would like to thank everyone involved in this, from the community group to the officers who've worked on it. It's not been the easy thing to do. The easiest and quickest thing to do, I'm sure, from our point of view, would have been to sell off the site, but we were wary about the history of the site and the feelings of local ward councillors. And I'd like to commend them as well in the voice they've provided for the local community and the aspirations they've clearly articulated for the use of this building going forward. So it's one of the few occasions these days where I think things have come together in a way that's been very positive, and I'm glad that we've been able to take advantage of that. Any further questions? David?
The extent to which, presumably, the internal dynamics of the school will have to be slightly rearranged to accommodate, or is it going to be left as it is?
The main change would be that there will have to be a physical segregation of the space inside between MIST and the community group. Otherwise, for the space that MIST are occupying, it will be laid out largely the way it is now. So there are no walls being knocked down as such. There will just be, it's mostly decoration of the walls. So most of the work that from the grant will go on the roof, the extent of the building and rewiring. But the actual configuration of the building internally will remain largely the same.
Well, I'm pleased with that because it is an iconic building, and I would echo Anthony's sentiments that it would have been easy to sell it off for development, but we've retained the edifice and more of the building, which is good because it's been up for about 120 years now, and it is iconic, and I think it will go some way to assuage in some of those who were really concerned and upset about having to stop using it as a school. I would also like to comment on, if I may, the notion of collaboration with other organisations and authorities. We in Torfaen have a pretty solid reputation for doing that, and this is another in a fairly long line of instances where we collaborate, and very often we are at the heart of the collaborative process as well, so that's good.
Thank you. If I can bring us then to the recommendations on page 29, page 30. That Cabinet authorises the refurbishment of the former Victoria Primary School and subsequent shared occupation by local authority and third sector partners involved with the My Support Team programme and Torfaen Arts Resource Centre. Secondly, that if any time TARC withdraws its interest or relinquishes some of the space allocated to it, then MIS will have the right of first refusal for that space. That Cabinet authorises the Assistant Chief Executive Resources to negotiate and execute the most appropriate legal documents to formally document the terms of occupation for each entity, and that will be based at the property from time to time. And lastly, that Cabinet grant delegated authority to the Executive Member for Performance Improvement and Corporate Governance as the Cabinet Member with responsibility for operational asset management, that's Veronica Crick, to determine any matters arising from this report that may require further executive approval. Can I have a show of hands on those recommendations? Thank you. That's carried. Thank you, Victor. Thank you, Veronica. Right, moving on then to agenda item 8, which is the introduction of a property appreciation loan. David, do you want to?
Sure. This is a positive news story, actually, in amongst everything else. It's an additional funding stream for homeowners to make improvements to their house, to make it warmer, safer, and more secure. 3/4 of the housing in Torfaen is currently in the private sector, in that it's owned by homeowners or private landlords. And this is a recognition of the fact that many people may have their house, but they may not have the means to make it more efficient, make it warmer, make it more secure. And this loan allows for that. It's a loan between 1,000. I mean, the report says all this, but it's a loan between 1,000 and 25 grand, I think, for improvements to make their homes warmer, better energy efficiency, lower bills, less CO2. So it's ticking a number of really important boxes, and really pertinent boxes at the moment when we consider fuel, poverty, climate crisis. I'm going to call it crisis rather than change, because this is where we are, and the fact that we're sitting on a housing stock which vastly needs updating. So this is a commitment from Welsh Government, and I think actually the European Union, towards achieving that. So it's a welcome funding stream. I'm sure Elcro will go into more detail.
Thank you, Councillor Daniels. Thank you, Leader. Yes, I think we've already highlighted how private sector housing is in significant disrepair, I think, in Torfaen. We do already, as a council, offer interest-free loans already. So we have the empty property loans, for example, and the home improvement loans. For a number of years, Welsh Government have recognised there's a need to sort of move away from a grant reliance culture to private sector home improvements, and have introduced repayable loans so the monies can be recycled and investment is ongoing. So this is a requirement for an additional product. There's recognition that the current loans that are offered by the council, that for some people the affordability of those loans are very difficult. So whilst there may be equity within a private sector property, for some people they simply couldn't afford monthly repayments. So this loan, the property appreciation loan being introduced and proposed, is essentially a loan that rather than being repaid on a monthly basis, would be repaid at the sale or disposal of the property. The current loan pot that Torfaen Council has is just over £1 million. So this proposal also earmarks a fund, a sum of money that would be specifically for those who cannot meet the other loan criteria for the home improvement loan. The other point of notice within the report in the finance section is that the local authority, just over half of that £1 million loan pot we have to repay back to Welsh Government in 2030. So we need to make sure that we can't use all the funding for the property appreciation loan, whereby we may not receive monies back until the sale of disposal of a property, which could be 10, 20, 30, 40 years hence. So we have to make quite a decided earmark for this product to ensure that we can still pay back the monies in 2030.
Any questions, Fiona?
I just wanted to make the statement that I think this is really positive. One of the biggest concerns I've had is, as much as newer buildings have had those energy efficient improvements, we've got a massive stock of old houses that really need that investment. So I very much welcome this, especially as those that are in the most vulnerable positions will have that opportunity to access it.
It's good to see, obviously, for people who can't necessarily afford a monthly payment, but that would be a way that they could improve their home. How is this going to be marketed? Is it going to be sort of kept so that people are referred to it if they've got an identified need, or will it be more widely marketed than that?
We do currently market the current loaned products that are available in Torfaen. People who are eligible for this loan will already have to have exhausted the other loan route. So there is a requirement for us to market it, and we do already have information on our websites, but following approval we could go through some sort of more social media campaign to try and encourage people to take up this product as well as the other ones.
I guess with any development like this, it's making sure that people who need it and can benefit from it most can find out about it, and so the money can be prioritised to where it will make the biggest difference, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, actually, and it's relating to what we were saying earlier, is there's an awful lot we do that we may not know about it until it comes before us, so the public certainly don't know about it, but it's all really valuable stuff. So I think, I agree. I think there should be a bit of a social media and wider comms sort of promotion of these services, because they're good news, and I think we really need people to understand that we're much more than bins. We do a hell of a lot.
I think it's about maybe getting the message out about this to, I hate the phrase, but sort of the molecular leaders within communities who might know the people who would benefit from this. I'm thinking in communities like Glenavon, I'm sure if you told sort of half a dozen people, gave them the information about this, they'd be able to know who might benefit most from it. And it's how we are intelligent in sort of getting messages out there so that they reach the part they need to reach most. Are we happy then to move to the recommendation on that 13.1? That Cabinet approve the introduction of a property appreciation loan product as owner-occupier repayable financial assistance. Show of hands. That's carried. Thank you. Thanks, Alka. Thanks, Dave. Right, move on to agenda item 9 then. That's... Oh, Fiona's got to leave. Right. I'll just wait until Fiona's left.
Is it somewhere else?
Right. Okay. Do you want me to hand over to David and Dermot then?
Yes.
Take it away.
Thank you, David. You're very helpful. I'd like to say that the consultation for the proposal at Ysgol Gyffin Gwynthrew is well underway, so this morning is neither the time nor the place to be discussing the merits or otherwise of the proposal. I do look forward, though, to our next Cabinet meeting, where we'll be able to see what people have said. Those that we've consulted with, we'll have some kind of feedback, and that'll be an interesting process. It will also help us figure out a decision on the next steps. I'm sure that at this point there will be some significant and important issues that we can all deliberate over. The paper that we have before us today provides details about the background to the proposal and the process and timing of the various stages of the statutory consultation. Specifically, it seeks approval for funding to allow officers the very important process of defining what the accommodation needs would be, for a new 3 to 11 Welsh medium primary school in the county borough. This doesn't come without any risks, but officers, or at least officer, will explain in a moment why this is necessary and perhaps allay any fears that what risks may be there are no more than minimal. I've discussed the issues on several occasions with officers in the last couple of days, and I'm now satisfied with the strength of their arguments, and on that basis I commend the report. So over to you, Dermot, and perhaps you can fill in some of the gaps.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Yall. I think the key point is that second one in 2.1. We're obviously looking for funding at risk approval for the sum of around £150,000. That will enable us to get works underway so we can deliver the school by 2021. Obviously, we've got some experience now of delivering schools, so we've a good idea that if we want to hit that target deadline, then that's what we need to do. Really, potentially there's a pinch point around supply and demand, and we think if we don't begin those works immediately at risk, because we still have to get the decision through, or you have to agree whether or not to proceed. The consultations complete in March or April. Probably in early April when we bring that report, we may not be able to deliver that supply in time for 2021. And really, Chair, that's it in a nutshell. This isn't unusual in terms of these sorts of processes, and there's a bit of a timing issue. But for us to get to that time point and ensure that we've got that supply ready, that's what we think we need to do.
Okay. I see in the key messages at 3.1 that the Welsh Government's agreed to fully fund the development.
So yeah, the £6 million funding is there for a 210 placement school. We're looking to build a 315 footprint, as we've done at Blenheim, for example, where we couldn't make the case for 315 now, but we anticipate that there will be growth in demand, so we'll put enough infrastructure in place to make sure we can meet demand further on. But yeah, it's absolutely fully funded. Unique. This doesn't fit within 21st century schools. This is part of the funding that's been released as Welsh Government, as part of its aspiration to get 1 million Welsh speakers by 2050. This is part of our Welsh Education Strategic Plan, and obviously it's highly unusual that we get 100% intervention rate from Welsh Government, so the risk here is about whether or not the Council decides to proceed or not. What we've said is, even if we don't proceed on at this point with this plan, ultimately it's likely we will expand Welsh Medium, and the learning that we get from the spend that we'll make now at risk will still inform any future development that we have. So it wouldn't be a complete loss in any case.
Any further questions before we move to the recommendations then? 11.1 on page 51, that we note and support the activities underway with regard to the proposal to extend the age range of Ysgolgell and Gwynllw from 11 to 18 to 3 to 18. And secondly, that we approve the funding at risk of £150,000 to carry out the initial scoping of the requirements of the 3 to 11 provision. Are we happy to agree those recommendations? That's carried. Thank you, colleagues. And thank you for attendance today, everyone.